60 years of silence can turn a house into a tomb and a woman into a ghost. But what happens when that ghost decides to start rattling her own chains? What happens when a mother, betrayed by her husband, her children, and the very system meant to protect her, finally decides that if she can't have justice, she will have the next best thing, vengeance? This is the story of how a monster was unmasked and an entire family legacy was brought to its knees, all because of one letter and a secret that refused to stay buried. Stay with us, follow our channel, and ring that notification bell because you won't want to miss a single moment of this incredible tale of retribution. The day he was born, I named him Michael. It was a strong, simple name, a name that felt like an anchor in the swirling chaos of my life. Holding him was the most profound agony I have ever known. His tiny fingers would curl around mine, his breath a warm puff against my neck, and in his innocent, unseeing eyes, I saw a reflection of a monster. I loved him with a fierce, desperate love that was tangled with a pain so deep it had no name. He was my son. He was my secret. He was the living, breathing evidence of my violation, a constant, beautiful, heartbreaking reminder of the life that had been stolen from me. Robert, ever the masterful stage director, orchestrated our family life with chilling precision. Our house, a grand Victorian with sprawling gardens and polished wood floors, was his stage. He cast me in the role of the fragile, neurotic wife, a part I was forced to play for an audience of two, our children. He was the architect of my silence, building walls around me brick by brick with words of feigned concern. "Your mother is delicate," he would tell a young Michael, ruffling his hair. "We have to be her strength." The years bled into one another, marked not by anniversaries or holidays, but by the regular dreaded appearances of Dr. Alistair Finch. He became Uncle Alistair, a benevolent, smiling figure who brought expensive toys for the children and expensive wine for Robert. He would sit in our living room, in Robert's favorite armchair, his laughter echoing off the walls that held my silent screams. Every time he looked at Michael, a flicker of something I couldn't name, pride, ownership, would cross his face, and the bile would rise in my throat. I would retreat to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I washed dishes, the clatter of porcelain a futile attempt to drown out the sound of his voice. I remember one of Michael's birthdays, maybe his 10th. The garden was full of balloons and screaming children. Alistair had arrived with a ridiculously large gift, a state-of-the-art chemistry set. He knelt before my son, his hands on Michael's shoulders. "You have a brilliant mind, young man," Alistair said, his voice oozing with avuncular charm. "Just like your father." He winked at Robert, who stood beaming beside them, a portrait of paternal pride. My heart fractured. I watched from the porch, a ghost at my own son's party, invisible. Later that evening, after the guests had gone, I found Michael in his room, meticulously arranging the beakers and test tubes. "Uncle Alistair is the best," he said, his eyes shining. "He thinks I'm smart." I wanted to scream, to grab him and tell him the truth about the man he idolized, to tell him whose blood truly ran in his veins. But I saw Robert standing in the doorway, his eyes cold and hard, a silent, unyielding warning. The words died in my throat, just as they always did. I simply smiled, a brittle, paper-thin expression. "Yes, darling, he is." Then came Claire, my daughter, my light. She was born 2 years after Michael, and she was unequivocally Robert's. I clung to her, pouring into her all the uncomplicated love I couldn't give her brother. Claire was a different child, more observant, more sensitive. She saw the cracks in the facade. She saw the way my hands trembled after a visit from Uncle Alistair. She saw the way my smile never quite reached my eyes. As a teenager, she once found me weeping quietly in the garden after Robert had dismissed a thought I'd had at dinner with a casual, "Oh, Jade, let the men handle the important topics." Claire sat beside me on the cold stone bench. "Why do you let him talk to you like that, Mom?" she asked, her young face etched with a confusion that bordered on pity. For a breathtaking moment, I considered telling her everything. The words were right there, pressing against my lips. But 60 years of silence is a powerful warden. How could I tear down her world? How could I destroy her image of the father she adored, the uncle she trusted? So I did what I always did. I lied. Your father is just under a lot of stress, sweetheart. It's his way. He doesn't mean it. She didn't look convinced, but she learned, as we all did, not to pull at the threads of our carefully woven tapestry. She learned to accept the established order. Michael, on the other hand, became his father's staunchest defender. He absorbed Robert's narrative completely. I was the unstable one, the source of all tension. "Why do you always have to upset Dad?" he'd demand, his teenage face a mask of frustration. "He does everything for this family, and you're just so difficult." Each word was a fresh stab from a blade I myself had inadvertently sharpened. I had protected him from the truth of his origin, and in doing so, I had allowed him to become a weapon against me. The house was no longer a home. It was a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial, and my own children were the prosecution. My cage was not made of iron bars, but of their love, their ignorance, and their loyalty to the man who held the key. I was a prisoner in a life I was supposed to be grateful for, surrounded by family, yet utterly, devastatingly alone. The decades wore on, polishing the surfaces of our lives to a high sheen while the foundations rotted away. Claire went to college. Michael started his career. The house grew quieter, the silence more profound. Then Robert's heart, the same heart that had shown me no mercy, began to fail him. The end came not in our home, the carefully curated stage of his life, but in the sterile, impersonal environment of a hospital room. Ironically, a wing of Havenwood General that his dear friend Alistair had helped fund. He lay there, shrunken against the white pillows, the steady beep of the heart monitor counting down his final moments. Michael and Claire were on either side of the bed, their faces streaked with tears. I stood at the foot of the bed, a silent observer. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a vast, hollow emptiness. I looked at this man, the architect of my 60-year-long incarceration, and I felt only the profound exhaustion of a long-distance runner who sees the finish line but has forgotten why they were running in the first place. His eyes, cloudy with medication and impending death, found mine. Michael leaned in. "Dad, what is it?" Robert's breath was a ragged whisper, a final command from the grave. He wasn't looking at his children. He was looking at me. "Jade," he rasped, his fingers twitching on the starched sheet. "Protect the family, the reputation, always the reputation." And then he was gone. The steady beep of the monitor dissolved into a single piercing tone. Claire let out a sob, burying her face in the blankets. Michael stood rigid, his jaw tight. They had heard the final words of a dying patriarch, a plea to uphold his legacy. I had heard something else entirely. I had heard the final rattle of my chains. Even in death, he would not release me. There was no apology, no confession, no flicker of remorse. His last act on this earth was to remind me of my duty, to ensure the lock on my cage would hold even after he was gone. A cold clarity washed over me. The war wasn't over. He had just passed the general's baton to our children. The days following the funeral were a blur of black clothes, somber casseroles from neighbors, and the hollow platitudes of condolence. Alistair was a constant presence, playing the part of the grieving best friend to perfection. He held Claire as she cried. He put a supportive hand on Michael's shoulder, murmuring about what a great man Robert had been. At one point, he approached me as I stood looking out the living room window, a cup of untouched tea in my hands. "Jade," he said, his voice thick with false sympathy. "Robert was my oldest friend. If there is anything at all you or the children need, you know where to find me." He placed his hand on my arm. The same touch, the same clinical presumption. 60 years vanished. I was back in that exam room, the crinkle of the paper, the cold dread. I snatched my arm away as if I'd been burned. The look of surprise on his face was fleeting, replaced by a cool, appraising stare. He knew that I remembered. And in that moment, he knew that I was no longer afraid of him. The final betrayal, the one that finally ignited the kindling of my dormant rage, came a week later. It was delivered not with a hiss, but with the gentle, concerned tones of my own children. They sat me down at the large mahogany dining table, the same table where we had played out the charade of a happy family for half a century. Michael cleared his throat, placing a stack of glossy brochures in the center of the table. "Mom," he began, his voice laced with the practiced patience of someone speaking to a child. "Claire and I have been talking, and we're worried about you." Claire picked up the thread, her gaze soft and pleading. "This house is so big for you, Mom. The upkeep, the memories. It must be overwhelming. We think it might be time to simplify things." I looked at the brochures. They were for a place called Willow Creek Senior Living. Pictures of smiling, silver-haired residents playing bingo and doing water aerobics stared up at me. It was a luxury prison, a more comfortable cage. "You want to sell the house?" I said. It wasn't a question. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "It's the most logical step. The inheritance. Dad's will is clear. Splitting the estate will be much cleaner if the property is liquidated. And honestly, Mom, your memory hasn't been the best lately. We think a place with professional care, where you don't have to worry about anything, would be the best thing for you." There it was. The narrative Robert had spent a lifetime crafting, now recited back to me by his disciples. I was fragile. I was forgetful. I was a burden to be managed. They weren't trying to care for me. They were trying to liquidate me, to pack me away in a neat, tidy box so they could get on with their lives, unencumbered by their difficult, grieving mother. They wanted to sell my cage and use the money to build their own futures, leaving me in a smaller, more manageable one. The coldness of it was breathtaking. It was the final, irrefutable proof that I had no one. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a slammed door. Michael's face hardened, his father's annoyance flickering in his eyes. "Mom, be reasonable. We've already spoken to a realtor. This is happening." "No," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "This house is mine. Your father left it to me, and I am not going anywhere." I stood up, my hands flat on the table, and for the first time in 60 years, I looked at my children not as a mother, but as an adversary. "And there's something else. I'm going to sue the hospital." The silence that followed was absolute. Claire's mouth fell open. Michael just stared, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Sue the hospital? For what? Malpractice over Dad's heart condition? Mom, you can't be serious. You're not thinking clearly." "Not for your father," I said, my voice as cold as the grave. "For me, for what Dr. Alistair Finch did to me in his exam room 60 years ago." The dam of 60 years finally broke. I told them. Not everything, not the part about Michael's true parentage, but enough. I told them about the exam, about the violation, about their father's dismissal, about the beginning of the silence. I watched their faces as the story unfolded, a story that dismantled every pillar of their existence. Claire grew pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Michael's face cycled through confusion, denial, and finally settled on a deep, ingrained skepticism. "Mom," he said, his voice strained, "that was 60 years ago. You must be mistaken. Uncle Alistair, he's been a friend to this family our entire lives. Dad would never have. He would have done something." "Your father did do something," I replied, the bitterness of a lifetime coding the words. "He told me to be quiet." That conversation pushed me to act. I found a lawyer, a young woman with kind eyes who listened patiently as I recounted the story that had been rotting inside me for 6 decades. She was sympathetic, but her professionalism was a shield against emotion. She took my case, but warned me of the immense, almost insurmountable hurdles we faced. The statute of limitations had expired decades ago. While there was no physical evidence, it was my word, the word of an 81-year-old woman whom my own children were ready to declare mentally incompetent, against that of a celebrated, beloved doctor. 2 weeks later, the official response came. It was a thick envelope, not embossed and celebratory like the one from the hospital's gala committee, but plain and cold. My lawyer read the key phrases aloud over the phone, her voice flat and devoid of hope. The board of Havenwood General has reviewed the claim. Given the significant passage of time, a complete lack of corroborating evidence, the unimpeachable reputation and decades of service of Dr. Finch. She paused, and I could hear her take a deep breath. They conclude that the claim holds, and I quote, no legal merit. No legal merit. The words echoed in the empty house. No merit. My truth, my pain, my stolen life, my 60 years of silence, they had been weighed and measured by a board of strangers and found wanting. They had no value. The system, the law, the very institution that was supposed to offer healing, had slammed its door in my face, officially declaring my suffering to be meaningless. I hung up the phone. I walked through the silent rooms of my house, the gilded cage Robert had built. I looked at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Our wedding, the children's school pictures, family vacations where my smile was a carefully painted mask. A gallery of lies. My children thought I was losing my mind. The law thought I was a liar. The world was preparing to celebrate my rapist. I had been abandoned. By my husband. By my children. By the law. I had played by the rules. I had been silent. I had protected the family reputation. And in the end, it had left me with nothing. A cold, hard rage, pure and clean as distilled poison, began to fill the hollow spaces inside me. If the world decided my truth had no merit, then I would have to create my own kind of value. If the system would not give me justice, I would carve it out of them myself. I walked over to the elegant secretary desk where Robert used to write his letters. I opened it. The invitation to Alistair Finch's gala was still sitting there, a gleaming white declaration of war. My war. And I finally knew how I was going to fight it. They had judged my claim to have no legal merit. Fine, I would judge them back, and my verdict would be ruin. I named him Michael. The name felt simple, clean, a shield, something to hide the truth behind. My son. I would look at him sleeping in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling, and feel a love so fierce it was a physical ache. But underneath it, coiling like a serpent, was the poison of his origin. The love was real, but it was fractured. Shattered glass, held together by duty and a desperate need to believe in something pure. He was the living, breathing, beautiful, terrible embodiment of my trauma. Every milestone was a celebration, laced with acid. His first word wasn't mama or dada. It was light. He was sitting on the living room floor, pointing a chubby finger at the sunbeam cutting through the dust motes. Light, he said, his voice a perfect, clear bell. Robert, standing behind me, clapped his hands together, his signet ring glinting. A genius! My son is a genius, Jade. He swept Michael into his arms, kissing his head. I smiled, the muscles in my face protesting the lie. Michael was reaching for the light, but he was born from the deepest darkness. His first steps were a lurching, determined toddle across the polished hardwood floors of our home in Havenwood. A beautiful two-story colonial with black shutters and a sprawling green lawn that Robert manicured with religious fervor. From the outside, it was a postcard of American success. From the inside, it was the most elegant prison ever constructed. Michael wobbled towards me, his arms outstretched, a triumphant grin on his face. I knelt to catch him, and as he fell into my arms, the smell of his baby shampoo filling my senses, I saw a ghost standing in the doorway. Not a literal ghost. Worse. Well, look at the little man, Dr. Alistair Finch boomed, his voice oozing a folksy charm that set my teeth on edge. He had become Uncle Alistair, a fixture in our lives, a constant, walking reminder. Robert had insisted upon it. It would look strange if we cut off my oldest friend, darling, he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. People would talk. So Uncle Alistair came for Sunday dinners. He brought Michael model airplanes and Claire porcelain dolls. He'd sit in Robert's favorite armchair swirling a brandy and tell stories about their university days. And he would watch me. He's the spitting image of you, Robert, Finch said that day, stepping into the room. He ruffled Michael's hair, his hand lingering a moment too long. Got that same determined chin. I felt the blood drain from my face. I scooped Michael up, holding him tight against my chest, a useless, human shield. He's tired, I murmured, my voice a thin thread. I should put him down for his nap. Robert laughed, a hearty, dismissive sound. Nonsense, Jade. Let Alistair see his godson. Don't be so fragile. Fragile. That was the first brick in the wall Robert built around me. Finch smiled, a predator's smile that never reached his cold, blue eyes. Now, Robert, be nice to your lovely wife. She's a wonderful mother. You can see it in how she fusses over him. He patted Michael's head again, his knuckles brushing my arm. I flinched, a small, involuntary movement, but Robert saw it. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second, a silent warning. Behave. I had to stand there and smile. I had to offer Dr. Finch a drink. I had to listen as he and Robert praised what a fine, strong boy Michael was becoming. The lie wasn't just a thought. It became a physical presence. It was a weight in my chest, a sour taste in my mouth, a constant low-grade hum of terror beneath my skin. Years later, we had Claire. The moment she was placed in my arms, I knew. It was different. This love was a clean, clear stream. There was no undertow of horror, no shadow of another man's face. She was Robert's. Entirely. And the guilt of that distinction was a new secret chamber in the prison of my heart. I loved Michael with every broken piece of me, but I loved Claire with a wholeness I didn't know I still possessed. I would watch them playing together on the lawn. Michael, dark-haired and intense like Finch, Claire, fair and easygoing like Robert, and I felt like a traitor to them both. Our house of lies was meticulously constructed. Robert was the architect, and my silence was the foundation. He controlled everything, but with a surgeon's precision, never a butcher's cleaver. The finances were a mystery to me. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it," he'd say, patting my hand if I ever asked about the bank statements. "That's my job. Your job is to make this house a home." Our social life was a curated performance. At dinner parties, if I ventured an opinion that was too sharp, too political, too me, Robert would gracefully cut in. "Ah, what my romantic wife means to say is," and he would rephrase my thoughts into something palatable, something bland, something that fit the role he had written for me. The role was that of the fragile mother. The artistic, sensitive soul who was prone to moods and anxieties. He wasn't cruel in front of people. He was concerned. "Jade's feeling a bit overwhelmed today," he'd confide in our friends with a sad, loving smile. "The children are a handful, and she gives them so much of herself." They would nod in sympathy, looking at me with pity. They saw a devoted husband caring for his delicate wife. I saw a master propagandist at work. The children, of course, learned this narrative by heart. It was the air they breathed. Michael, desperate for his father's approval, became his staunchest defender. When he was about 15, I had a bad week. The anniversary of the event was approaching, and I was withdrawn, quiet. I spent most of my time in the garden, pulling weeds until my fingers were raw. One evening, Michael found me sitting alone in the darkening living room. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with the teenage awkwardness of forced concern. "I'm fine, Michael. Dad's worried. He said you barely touched your dinner." I wasn't hungry. He shifted his weight, a tall, handsome boy who looked so much like a man I tried every day to forget. "He's just trying to take care of you, Mom," he said, the words a perfect echo of his father's. "You know how you get. You get lost in your own head sometimes. Dad says we have to be patient with you." The knife, already lodged in my heart, twisted. It was his unknowing hand on the hilt that made it so unbearable. He was trying to be a good son, defending the strong, stable father against the moody, unpredictable mother. He was defending the man who had orchestrated my silence against the woman who was drowning in it. "Your father," I said, my voice dangerously low. is not always who you think he is." Michael recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "What is that supposed to mean? Dad is the best man I know. He provides everything for us. He loves you." The accusation in his voice was clear. "And you are ungrateful." I said nothing more. The wall was too high. Robert had built it brick by brick, and my own son was now one of its guards. Claire was different. She was more observant, quieter. She didn't parrot Robert's lines, but she learned the cardinal rule of our household: do not question the established order. I remember one afternoon, she was about 12, sitting at the kitchen table doing her homework while I was trying to balance a checkbook for the household account, one of the few financial tasks Robert permitted me. I was short by $20. I knew exactly where it had gone. Robert had taken it from my purse that morning for golf, he'd said with a wink. He walked in then, home early. "Still struggling with that, dear?" he asked, peering over my shoulder. "I'm short $20, I said, keeping my voice even. He feigned a thoughtful frown. "Are you sure?" "You must have forgotten to write something down. You know how your memory can be sometimes when you're stressed." He smiled, a placid, infuriating smile. "Don't worry. I'll fix it." He took the checkbook from me, and in 2 minutes, he'd found my error. I didn't look at him. I looked at Claire. She had stopped writing, her pencil hovering over the page. She was watching us, her brow furrowed. For a single breathtaking moment, our eyes met. In her gaze, I saw a flicker of something, not pity, but a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. She saw the lie. She saw the casual dismissal, the subtle exertion of power. My heart leaped. She sees me. But just as quickly, the flicker was gone. She dropped her gaze back to her textbook, her shoulders hunching slightly. She had learned her lesson well. Look away. Don't get involved. The peace of the family was more important than the truth. In that moment, she wasn't Robert's accomplice, but she was a willing citizen of his regime, and that somehow felt even lonelier. Robert died of a weak heart. The irony was so bitter, it was almost poetic. A man whose entire life was a testament to a lack of courage, felled by a failure of the one muscle that is supposed to symbolize it. He spent his last week at Havenwood General, in a private room on the top floor. A room I'm sure Alistair Finch arranged. I sat by his bedside for hours, a dutiful wife performing her final role. The nurses would come in and tell me what a devoted woman I was. Michael and Claire would visit, holding his hand, telling him he was strong, that he'd pull through. I would just sit there, watching the rhythmic dance of the heart monitor, a green line charting the final beats of my jailer's life. On his last day, the room was quiet, except for the soft beep of the machines. His breathing was shallow. He opened his eyes and looked at me. They were cloudy, roomy, but for a moment, the old sharpness was there. He clutched my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Jade," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. I leaned in. This was it. After 60 years. 60 years of silence, of lies, of a life stolen. I thought, for one fleeting, foolish moment, that he would say it, that he would confess, that he would grant me the smallest measure of release. "I'm sorry." 3 words. That's all it would have taken. Instead, he pulled me closer, his eyes pleading. "Protect the family name, Jade," he whispered, the words rattling in his chest. "Keep it safe, for the children. Promise me." And then he was gone. The green line on the monitor flattened into a solid, unwavering note of finality. He died not with a confession on his lips, but with one last command. He didn't release me from my chains. He tried to make me their eternal keeper. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a profound, hollow coldness. I gently removed my hand from his. The funeral was a spectacle. The whole of Havenwood turned out to mourn the passing of Robert Thorne, the generous husband, the pillar of the community, the loving father. Alistair Finch gave a eulogy that painted Robert as a saint, a man of unwavering integrity. I sat in the front pew, a black veil shielding my face, an icon of dignified grief. Inside, I was a desert. I listened to them praise the architect of my prison and felt a strange, detached amusement. They were mourning a man who had never existed. 2 weeks later, the final betrayal came, not with a whisper, but with the cloying language of concern. Michael and Claire sat me down in the living room, in the very spot where their father used to hold court. They sat opposite me on the sofa, a united front. Michael, ever his father's son, took the lead. He cleared his throat, his expression a carefully rehearsed mask of solemnity. "Mom," he began, "Claire and I have been talking, and we're worried about you." Claire stared at her hands, twisting a loose thread on her jeans. "This big house," Michael continued, gesturing around the room that held the entirety of my adult life. "It's too much for you to manage on your own. The upkeep, the stairs. We think it's time to consider a change." "A change?" I asked, my voice flat. "We've found a lovely assisted living facility," Claire chimed in, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "It's just outside of town. It's beautiful. They have gardens and activities and nurses on staff around the clock." The pieces clicked into place with chilling precision. They weren't just talking about the house. They were talking about me. "You've been a little forgetful lately, Mom," Michael said gently. "The other day, you couldn't find your keys, and you've been so withdrawn since Dad passed. We think a place like that would be safer for you. Less stressful." My failing memory, my confusion, my fragility. It was Robert's narrative, his final ghost, speaking through his children. They weren't protecting me. They were liquidating their inheritance. They were disposing of the inconvenient, aging matriarch whose grief wasn't performing the way it was supposed to. They saw a confused old woman. They didn't see the silent, screaming prisoner who was finally tasting a sliver of freedom. They wanted to move me from one gilded cage to another, smaller one, and wash their hands of me. That was the push. The final brutal shove that sent me over the edge I'd been teetering on for 60 years. I didn't argue with them. I just nodded. "I'll think about it," I said, my calmness seeming to unnerve them more than any protest would have. The next day, I didn't call a real estate agent. I called a lawyer, a young woman from 3 states away, with a sharp voice and no ties to Havenwood. Her name was Sarah. I told her everything, the words spilling out of me over the phone line, a 60-year-old torrent of suppressed truth. The clinic, Dr. Finch, Robert's complicity, the birth of my son. She listened without interruption, her silence a compassionate vessel for my pain. Together, we drafted a letter. It was polite, formal, and devastating. We addressed it to the board of Havenwood General Hospital, detailing the assault 60 years ago. We didn't ask for money. We asked for an acknowledgement, a recognition of the truth. We sent it via registered mail. And then I waited. For a month, I lived in a state of suspended animation. Every time the mail truck rumbled down the street, my heart hammered against my ribs. It was a foolish hope, I knew. But it was hope, nonetheless. A tiny, flickering candle in the vast darkness of my past. The response came on a Tuesday. A single, crisp envelope of heavy cream-colored cardstock, the hospital's logo embossed in the corner. My hands trembled as I slid it open with one of Robert's old letter openers. It was one page to summarize a lifetime of pain. The words were cold, corporate legalese, designed to extinguish any spark of hope. They cited the statute of limitations, a legal wall too high to climb after so many decades. They mentioned the complete lack of physical evidence, a cruel joke considering the evidence was a 60-year-old man who called me Mom. They pointed to Dr. Alastair Finch's long and unblemished record of service to the community, his charitable works, his sterling reputation. And then, the final paragraph. The sentence that burned itself into my mind, branding my soul. I read it aloud to the empty room, my voice a dead monotone. Therefore, in light of the aforementioned factors, the hospital considers your claim to have no merit. No merit. The words hung in the silent air of the house. No merit. My stolen youth. My fractured motherhood. The son who was the product of a crime. The 60 years of smiling through agony. The endless nights staring at the ceiling, reliving every single second. My entire life of pain. The secret that had hollowed me out from the inside, had no merit. It wasn't just a legal rejection, it was a judgment, a confirmation of what Robert had told me all those years ago. Your truth does not matter. Your pain is an inconvenience. You are nothing. The system would not help me. The family I had sacrificed my soul to build had abandoned me. I stood there in the quiet living room, the letters shaking in my hand, and something inside me shifted. The last embers of hope were extinguished, and in their place, something cold and hard and clear began to form. A diamond of pure, unadulterated rage. Fine. My life had no merit to them. Then I would give it merit myself. I would find my own value. If they wouldn't give me justice, I would not beg for it. I would build my own justice from the rubble. I sat them down at the very same dining room table where Robert had delivered his edicts for 60 years. The polished mahogany still reflected a distorted version of the world, just as it always had. Michael, ever my protector in his own misguided way, placed a comforting hand on my arm, his touch feeling less like affection and more like the gentle handling of a fragile, antique vase that was about to be moved into storage. Claire sat opposite, her hands clasped tightly around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking, her lawyerly composure a thin veneer over a daughter's anxious pity. "Mother," Michael began, his voice softened with the patronizing tone he'd perfected over the last decade. "We've looked at some wonderful places. The brochures are right here. Oakwood Manor, it has a garden. You'd like that." He slid the glossy pamphlets across the table. Images of smiling, silver-haired residents playing shuffleboard and painting watercolors stared up at me. It was a gallery of serene endings, a humane and tidy conclusion to a life they no longer knew how to manage. They saw a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied up before the inheritance could be neatly divided. I picked up a brochure, my hand trembling just enough to sell the performance. I let my eyes skim the words. Dignified living. Community. Peace of mind. It was a prison, just with better lighting and a shared dining hall. Another cage, designed by my children this time. I looked from Michael's earnest face to Claire's carefully neutral one. They were Robert's children, through and through. They had learned his primary lesson, that uncomfortable truths must be managed, packaged, and put away. I let a long, slow breath escape me, a sigh I had practiced in the mirror. It was the sound of resignation, of a battle lost. "You're right," I said, my voice a papery whisper. They both leaned in, straining to hear the surrender. "You're absolutely right. I can't manage this house anymore. It's too much." I looked around the room, letting my gaze linger on the heavy velvet curtains Robert had insisted on. "It's all too much. I need to get my affairs in order." The relief that washed over their faces was so profound, it was almost comical. Michael's shoulders, which had been tensed up to his ears, visibly dropped. Claire finally took a sip of her tea, the clink of the mug against her teeth, the only sound in the room. They had expected a fight, a senile tantrum, a clinging to the past. They had braced for the difficult emotional labor of convincing a stubborn old woman to go quietly, and I had given them the easiest possible victory. "Oh, Mom, that's so good to hear," Michael said, his hand squeezing mine. "We just want what's best for you." "We were so worried." "Of course, dear," I said, patting his hand. "I know you do." They saw a defeated old woman, a relic giving way to the practical demands of the future. They didn't see the gears grinding behind my tired eyes. They didn't see the cold, clear blueprint of my vengeance taking shape. My revenge would not be a bomb, a loud and messy explosion that would grant them the satisfaction of a visible catastrophe. No, it would be a blight, a slow, creeping rot that would start in the foundations of their perfect family and spread upwards until the entire structure, which they believed to be built on a bedrock of honor and love, collapsed under the weight of its own lies. And I would be the gardener who planted the seed. I started with the foundation, the bloodline. "I'll need some time, of course," I said, my voice gaining a flicker of purpose that they mistook for the practicality of an elderly woman facing a big move. "There are so many things to sort through." 60 years of memories in this house. In the attic. Robert's things. Claire nodded, ever the pragmatist. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. We can get a company to help to clear things out. No, I said a little too sharply. I softened my tone immediately. No, thank you, dear. It's something I need to do myself. A way of saying goodbye. To your father. To the house. This they understood. It fit neatly into their narrative of the grieving widow, the fragile matriarch. It was sentimental, poignant, and perfectly harmless. They agreed, their condescension a shield that made me invisible. In the weeks that followed, the attic became my sanctuary and my workshop. They thought I was up there weeping over old photographs and baby clothes. And I was. But my tears were not of sorrow. They were tears of rage, 60 years of them, crystallizing into a diamond-hard resolve. The attic was a mausoleum of our shared life. It smelled of dust, cedar, and forgotten time. Sunbeams, thick with dancing motes, cut through the gloom, illuminating stacks of boxes, furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts, and the detritus of 2 lifetimes. I moved slowly, methodically. I wasn't just looking for something, I was immersing myself in the past, relearning its textures and smells. I ran my fingers over a box of Claire's old ballet shoes, the satin frayed. I lifted Michael's first baseball glove, the leather stiff and dry. These were the props from the stage play of our family life, and then I found them, tucked away in a heavy leather trunk, beneath a moth-eaten military uniform from a war Robert never saw, were his journals. There were 5 of them, thick, leather-bound volumes with marbled end papers. Robert, a man who demanded silence from others, was meticulously loud on paper. He had chronicled his life, his business dealings, his opinions on politics, his frustrations with his employees. It was a testament to his own self-importance. I spent days doing nothing but reading. I sat on a dusty old stool, the air thick and still, and I let his voice fill my head. His tidy, disciplined cursive, slanting ever so slightly to the right. The specific way he formed his capital R. The flourish he added to the T in his signature. After 60 years of marriage, of seeing that handwriting on checks, on notes left on the kitchen counter, on birthday cards signed with a love that was purely transactional, I knew it better than my own. His handwriting was the script of my imprisonment. And now, it would be the key to my escape. I didn't need to be a master forger. I just needed to be a diligent student. I practiced on scrap paper, copying his words, feeling the rhythm of his hand. I wasn't just mimicking the shapes of the letters. I was channeling the man himself. The arrogance, the certainty, the complete lack of self-doubt. Once I was confident, I made a trip to a specialty stationery shop in a town 2 counties over. I described the journals I was trying to match. The clerk, a kind man with ink-stained fingers, found one tucked away in his storeroom, an old, empty journal made by the same company, bound in the same dark green leather, filled with the same creamy, watermarked paper. It was perfect, an empty vessel waiting for a new history, a new and terrible truth. Back in the attic, my sanctuary, I began to write. I didn't start at the beginning. I started in the middle, creating the illusion of a diary kept over years. I chose a date from our first year of marriage, a few months after the visit to Dr. Finch's office. I dipped the vintage fountain pen into a bottle of sepia ink, the color aged to match the faint markings in Robert's original volumes. My hand was steady. There was no hesitation. The words flowed out of me, not as Jade, but as Robert. I became the architect of my own cage. October 12th, I wrote, my knuckles aching as I forced my script into his rigid, masculine slant. Another meeting with the specialist in the city today. Dr. Albright. He was blunt, more so than the last one. The results are conclusive. Mumps as a boy, he said. A severe case. He used a lot of medical terms, but the meaning was simple, brutal, irreversible. I am a dead end, a tree that will bear no fruit. I paused, rereading the words. It felt real. It felt like him. That cold agricultural metaphor. It was pure Robert. He saw lineage as a crop, a legacy to be harvested. I let a few fictional weeks pass on the page before the next entry. I wrote about his work, about a minor dispute with a neighbor, grounding the lie in a bed of mundane truth. Then, I brought myself into the narrative. November 3rd. Jade is glowing, positively radiant. She told me tonight, we are to expect a child. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hope she took my silence for shock, for overwhelming joy. How could I tell her? How could I stand in the middle of her happiness and detonate this truth? She is so young, so full of life. This news is everything she's ever wanted. And it is a lie. I let the ink dry, the words glinting in the weak light of the single attic bulb. I was creating a ghost, a version of Robert tortured by a secret I had invented for him. It was a beautiful, cruel irony. He had demanded my silence to protect his reputation, and now his own voice would be the thing to shatter it. Page by page, I built the narrative. I filled the diary with his supposed private torment. I wrote of his crushing despair, his sleepless nights, his growing suspicion of me. I made him a tragic figure, a man betrayed by both his body and his wife. December 21st. I watch her when she doesn't know I'm looking. Her hand rests on her belly. There is a serenity to her that I find infuriating. Whose child is it? The question burns in my mind like a hot coal. I go over every man she knows, every interaction, a delivery boy, a friend's husband. The thought is poison, but the alternative is worse. To expose her would be to expose myself, to admit my own failure, my own deficiency. The family name, my father's name, would become a laughingstock in this town, a finch raising another man's cuckoo. The humiliation is unthinkable. I used his own logic, his own obsession with status and appearances, and turned it back on itself like a weapon. Every word was chosen to echo the arguments he had used to silence me. The family name, the fear of public shame, it was all there, but now it served my purpose. The final, devastating entry was dated a few weeks after Michael's birth. August 14th. I held the boy today. Michael, she has named him. He has her eyes. He has none of mine. I looked at him, this living, breathing symbol of my failure, and I made a decision. He will be my son. He will be a finch. The world will never know the truth. I will raise him as my own, and Jade will play the part of the devoted wife. She owes me that much. This is the price of her transgression. We will build a life on this lie, a fortress of propriety. It is the only way to protect what matters, the only way to survive. It was perfect. A confession, a justification, and a condemnation, all written in his own hand. It painted him not as a monster who enabled my suffering, but as a long-suffering victim who sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of honor. It was a narrative my children, especially Michael, could understand. It was a lie they would be desperate to believe. I didn't give it to them. I didn't stage a dramatic discovery. The best lies are the ones people think they uncover themselves. Robert's old study, which had been his command center, was now just a room filled with books and memories. Claire, in her efficient way, had decided it would be the first room to be cleared out for the estate agent. She spoke of painters and staging, of maximizing its appeal. I knew she would be thorough. There was a single floorboard near the old mahogany desk that had been loose for as long as I could remember. Robert had always meant to fix it, but never had. It was one of the few imperfections he tolerated. I pried it up with the tip of a fireplace poker. The space beneath was dark and dusty. I wrapped the poisoned diary in a piece of oilcloth, as if to protect it from the damp of ages, and wedged it deep inside the cavity. I replaced the board, nudging it until it was almost, but not quite, flush with the others. A tiny, irresistible irregularity. Then I went downstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and waited. The seed was planted. Now, I just had to let it germinate in the dark. While the quiet poison of the diary seeped into the foundations of my family, I turned my attention to the other pillar of my prison, Dr. Alistair Finch. The man whose name was synonymous with healing and integrity in Havenwood. The man whose hands had been the first violation. My lawyer's words still echoed in my ears. No merit. The system had judged my 60-year-old trauma and found it worthless. The statute of limitations, the lack of evidence, the towering reputation of the accused. They formed an impenetrable fortress. A direct assault was futile. But men like Alistair, Men who wield absolute power in small towns for decades are never entirely clean. Their pedestals are always built on something other than pure virtue. They believe they are untouchable, and that belief makes them careless. Over the years, I had been a ghost in my own home, a silent observer at countless dinner parties and holiday gatherings. Robert and Alistair, his dearest friend, would often retreat to the study with glasses of brandy, believing I was too fragile or too dim-witted to understand their important conversations. But I listened. Oh, how I listened. Their words were a low murmur through the heavy oak door, but certain phrases snagged in my memory. Discretion. Hospital funds. Smart investments. The charity board doesn't need to be bothered with the details. At the time, they were just fragments, the boring talk of powerful men. Now, they were a thread. I didn't have proof, but I had a direction. Robert, for all his bluster, kept meticulous records. In the days I spent sorting his office, a performance for my children, I wasn't just packing books. I was searching. In a locked drawer of his desk, I found a set of private ledgers. They weren't official. They were his personal accounting of favors done, of debts owed, of gentlemen's agreements. And there, sprinkled throughout the pages, was Alistair's name, notes about a loan to cover a bad stock market bet, funneled through a hospital improvement fund, remarks about a construction contract for a new wing awarded to a company owned by Alistair's brother-in-law at a price that seemed suspiciously high, a notation about a large, anonymous donation to the hospital's primary charity, the Havenwood Health Trust, followed by an almost identical sum being transferred to a private investment account that Robert and Alistair shared. It was a web of casual, confident corruption woven over decades by men who believed they were above scrutiny. It wasn't the crime I wanted to punish him for, but it was a crime the world would understand. It had numbers, it had documents, it had merit. My weapon would be a single sheet of paper. I went to the public library and used one of their typewriters. The clack of the keys, a rhythmic, satisfying sound. I wore gloves. I used plain, cheap paper. I would leave no trace. This attack had to be surgical, anonymous. The letter was addressed to a Mr. Ben Carter at the Regional Sentinel. I had done my research on him too. He was young, ambitious, and stuck writing human interest stories about county fairs and centenarian birthdays. He was hungry for a real story, something that could make his career. I would give him the scent of one. The letter I composed was a masterpiece of insinuation. I made no direct accusations. I simply asked questions. To Mr. Carter. As a longtime resident of Havenwood and a supporter of Havenwood General Hospital, I have always admired the work of the Havenwood Health Trust. Dr. Alistair Finch's lifelong dedication to managing its funds is, of course, legendary. Perhaps in your capacity as an investigative journalist, you might be interested in exploring the Trust's remarkable financial success. One might ask, for instance, how a small-town charity has managed to fund such ambitious projects while also engaging in what appear to be sophisticated, high-risk investment strategies more common to a hedge fund. One might also inquire about the bidding process for hospital construction projects over the past 30 years and the remarkable good fortune of a handful of well-connected local contractors. Is it simple coincidence or a testament to Dr. Finch's loyalty to his friends? Finally, it would be a fascinating piece of financial journalism to trace the flow of certain large, anonymous donations. Where does such generosity truly originate, and where does it ultimately go? These are merely the questions of a concerned citizen who believes that transparency is the cornerstone of public trust. I am sure a man of Dr. Finch's unimpeachable character would welcome the opportunity to illuminate these complex matters for the community he has served so faithfully. Sincerely, a friend of Havenwood. It was perfect. It was respectful, questioning, and utterly devastating. I didn't offer a single piece of evidence. I just pointed a hungry reporter toward a locked door and told him there might be a feast inside. I sealed the envelope, affixed a stamp with my gloved fingers, and mailed it from a postbox in the next town over. The fuse was lit. The two threads of my plan, one aimed at my family and one at my tormentor, were now unspooling in the dark. All I had to do was wait for the beautiful, terrible, inevitable collapse. It didn't take long. In the quiet, orderly life I had curated, the ensuing chaos felt like a symphony reaching its crescendo, each instrument of my design playing its part in perfect, terrible time. The first note was a phone call from Claire. Her voice was thin, stretched taut with an emotion I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't pity or concern. It was a new sound. It was horror. "Mom? Are you there?" "Of course, dear. Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice calm and placid, the gentle matriarch concerned for her overwrought child. There was a pause, a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "I was in Dad's study today. Cleaning. Like we talked about." "Yes?" I prompted gently. "I found something. Under the floorboards." Her voice cracked on the last word. "A diary. One of his old ones, I think. I've been reading it." I remained silent, letting her words hang in the air between us. I could picture her perfectly, sitting in Robert's leather chair, the book open in her lap, her carefully constructed world dissolving around her. "Mom," he says, "it says he couldn't have children. It says Michael isn't his son." The words came out in a rush, a torrent of disbelief and agony. "It's ridiculous, isn't it? It's a joke. He must have been, I don't know, delusional, grieving, writing some kind of fiction." She was searching for an explanation, any explanation that would keep the walls of her reality from caving in. "I don't know what to tell you, Claire," I said, my voice soft with feigned confusion. "Your father, he kept many things to himself." "I'm getting a DNA test," she said, her voice hardening, the lawyer taking over from the terrified daughter. "I need to know. Michael and I. We need to know the truth." "Whatever you think is best, dear," I said, and then I hung up. The seed had not only sprouted, it had broken ground. 2 days later, the second note of the symphony sounded. It arrived with the morning paper, folded neatly on my doorstep. There, on the front page of the Regional Sentinel, below the fold but impossible to miss, was the headline, "Havenwood General Charity Fund under scrutiny, questions raised over financial practices." The article was carefully worded, just as my letter had been. It was filled with phrases like alleged irregularities and calls for greater transparency. It didn't accuse Alistair Finch of anything outright. It didn't have to. It simply placed his name, the great unimpeachable name of St. Alistair, at the very center of a burgeoning scandal. The article mentioned his decades-long unilateral control over the fund. It mentioned opaque investments and a pattern of awarding contracts to a close circle of associates. Ben Carter had found the locked door, and he was beginning to kick it in. It all came crashing down that evening. The doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent peal that echoed through the silent house. I knew who it was. I opened the door to find both my children standing on the porch, framed by the twilight. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck. Claire's face was pale and blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed and blazing with a cold fire. She was clutching a piece of paper in her hand, the results of the DNA test, no doubt. And Michael, my son. He looked like a ghost. His face, usually so full of confident certainty, was a blank mask of shock. He was staring at me, but his eyes were vacant, as if he were looking at a stranger. A complete and utter stranger. They swept past me into the house, into the living room, the room of so many silent, suffocating dinners. They didn't sit. They stood in the center of the room, 2 planets knocked from their orbits. Claire was the one who spoke. She was shaking, her whole body trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. She held up the crumpled paper. "He's not my brother," she hissed, the words sharp as broken glass. "He's my half-brother. Robert Finch was not his father." Then her gaze shifted, locking onto me with an intensity that would have once terrified me. She waved the diary, which she held in her other hand. "And you did this. You let us believe. You let him believe, and for 60 years, you built this entire family on a lie." Her voice rose to a scream. "You destroyed everything." Michael said nothing. He just stood there, his world shattered, his identity erased. The man he had spent his life defending, the father whose legacy he sought to protect, was not his father. The woman he had patronized and sought to put away in a home for her own good was the keeper of a secret that invalidated his entire existence. He was the son of a lie, the living embodiment of my hidden trauma. I looked at their broken faces, the children of my pain and my silence. The son who was a constant reminder of my violation, and the daughter who was the product of my loveless, coerced marriage. For 60 years, their comfort had been built upon my suffering. Their perfect family was a house of cards balanced on my back. Now, the house was falling, and they were furious that I had finally decided to stand up. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. The fear I had lived with for 6 decades was gone, burned away by the cold, clean fire of my resolve. I looked at Claire's furious, tear-streaked face and Michael's hollow eyes, and for the first time, I told them the truth. My voice was not the weak whisper of a grieving widow. It was not the hysterical cry of a madwoman. It was the cold, hard, dispassionate clarity of a final judgment. "Destroyed everything?" I asked, my voice low and steady, cutting through Claire's sobs. "What exactly did I destroy, Claire? The beautiful lie you've been living in. The comfortable story you told yourselves about your noble father and your fragile mother?" I took a step towards them. "You want to know the truth? Not Robert's self-serving, fictionalized version in a diary I wrote myself, but the real truth?" Claire's mouth fell open. Michael flinched as if struck. "That's right," I said, the admission landing in the silent room like a stone. "I wrote it. I wanted you to find it. I wanted you to see the rot in the foundations." I turned my eyes to Michael. "Your father wasn't Robert Finch. Your father was Dr. Alistair Finch." The name dropped into the silence, and the last vestiges of color drained from Michael's face. "It happened 60 years ago," I continued, my voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "In his examination room at Havenwood General, he was your father's best friend. I went for a checkup. I was young, and I trusted him. He used that trust under the guise of a medical procedure, and he assaulted me. I laid out every detail: the coldness of the examination table, the smell of antiseptic, the clinical words he used to mask his actions, the feeling of being trapped, paralyzed, not just by him, but by the weight of propriety and expectation. I went home and I told your father," I said, turning my gaze back to Claire. "I told Robert everything. I was hysterical, I was in pain, and I was terrified. And do you know what your noble, honorable father did? He told me I was being dramatic. He told me I must have misunderstood, and when I insisted, he told me to be silent. He said I would ruin Alistair's reputation. He said I would bring shame upon our family. My truth, my pain, was less important than his friend's good name and his own public image." I let that sink in, watching their faces crumble. A few weeks later, I learned I was pregnant. With you, Michael. I knew you weren't Robert's son, and he knew it too. This time he didn't just use words, he used his fists. He made it very clear that I would have the baby, and that baby would be his. We would be the perfect family, and if I ever spoke a word of the truth, he would have me committed to an institution. He would prove I was unstable, and everyone, including my own children, would believe him. I looked from one to the other. "So yes, Claire, I built my life on a lie, because your father gave me no choice. I was a prisoner in this house, in this marriage, in this life. Every time Uncle Alistair came for dinner, I had to smile and serve him a meal, while his son, my son, sat at the table beside him. Every time your father told you I was fragile or unwell, he was reinforcing the walls of my cage. He spent 60 years silencing me." I took a deep breath. "He is dead now, and I will not be silent anymore. I did not destroy our family." There was no family to destroy. There was only a stage and a script written by a coward and a cast of actors who never dared to look behind the curtain. I have not destroyed anything. I have simply turned on the lights. For the first time in their lives, my children were utterly, completely silent. The room was filled with nothing but the sound of their world ending and the quiet, steady beat of my own liberated heart. The television hummed in the corner of the living room, a blue-gray eye in the gathering dusk. I didn't turn on the lamps. The shadows felt like old friends now, honest in a way the light in this house never was. On the screen, a local news anchor with a professionally neutral face was talking about Havenwood General. His voice was a sterile drone, reporting on the ongoing investigation into the hospital's charitable foundation. He used words like misappropriation, breach of fiduciary duty, and gross mismanagement. Then, Alistair's face filled the screen. It was an old photograph, the one from the gala invitation, the portrait of a saint. The anchor's voice continued, a bland scalpel dissecting a reputation. He mentioned that the prestigious Lifetime of Service Award, which had been presented to Dr. Finch just weeks ago, had been officially and publicly rescinded by the board. They cited the need to maintain the unimpeachable integrity of the institution. Integrity. The word hung in the air, a sour joke. They never mentioned the assault. They never would. My anonymous tip had been a key turned in a rusty lock, but it had opened a different door than the one I had originally hammered against. I had aimed for his soul. Instead, I had hit his legacy, his finances, his public face. And it turned out, for a man like Alistair Finch, they were one and the same. He was a pillar of the community, and I had simply pointed out the termites gnawing at its base. The rest of the structure came down on its own. He wasn't a monster in their eyes, not the kind that hides in examination rooms. He was just a common crook, a man who got careless with other people's money. In a way, it was a more fitting end. He had stolen my life, my body, my peace. It seemed only right that the world would punish him for stealing something it actually valued: money. I turned off the television. The silence that rushed in was heavy, thick with things unsaid. The phone rang later that evening. I knew who it was before I picked it up. "He's ruined." Claire's voice was a shard of ice. Not hello, not how are you. Just that. "Yes," I said, my own voice calm, steady. The voice of a distant observer. "They took back his award. It's all over the news. People are talking. The hospital is in chaos. All because of you." "No, Claire. It's all because of him. You did this," she hissed, the venom palpable even through the line. "You couldn't just let it go. 60 years, Mother. 60 years, and you had to burn everything to the ground. For what? For some distorted memory?" I could hear the tremor in her voice, the desperate need to cling to the world she knew, the father she adored. "It wasn't a distorted memory, Claire. It was my life. The one you and Michael were living was the distortion. We were a family," she cried, her voice cracking. "We were happy. You were our mother. He was our father. We had a good life, a respected life. You had a comfortable lie," I corrected gently. "I was the price of that comfort. Your father, he was the architect of the cage, but Alistair Finch forged the bars." "Don't you dare talk about Dad that way," she sobbed, a raw, wounded sound. "He protected us. He kept this family together while you were fragile." Fragile. That old, convenient word. The label he had so carefully stitched onto my soul, so no one would ever look too closely at the seams. "He didn't protect you, Claire. He protected himself. He protected his name. He sacrificed me on that altar, and he taught you to do the same." I took a breath, the air in the stuffy living room tasting of dust and decay. "The family you're mourning wasn't real. It was a performance, and my silence was the stage. The play is over now. The lights have come up." There was a long, ragged silence on the other end of the line. I could picture her, standing in her own perfect house, surrounded by her own perfect family, the foundations of her entire existence cracking beneath her feet. "Michael is gone," she said finally, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He packed a bag and left this morning. He didn't even say goodbye to his children. He just left. He said he needed to find out who he is, who he really is." A pang, sharp and deep, went through me. Not of regret, but of profound sorrow for him. My son. the living, breathing secret I had carried. He was collateral damage, a victim in his own right, born of violence and raised on a lie. His entire identity had been a carefully constructed fiction, and I had been the one to hand him the final, devastating chapter. "He'll be all right," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "He's strong." "What do you know about strength?" she spat. "You destroyed him. You destroyed everything. The inheritance you know I was counting on to secure my children's future. It's a poisoned well now. It's blood money. How could you be so selfish?" Selfish. After 60 years of self-annihilation, of erasing myself piece by piece so they could have their perfect picture, I was selfish. The irony was so immense it was almost funny. "Yes," I said, and the word was not an admission of guilt, but a claiming of a right. After a lifetime of being selfless for the sake of a lie, I finally chose to be selfish for the sake of my truth. "I have to go now, Claire." "Don't you hang up on me. Don't you dare. I haven't—" I placed the receiver gently back into its cradle. The connection was cut. The last thread to the world Robert had built was severed. I walked through the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It was no longer a home. It was a ruin, a monument to a war no one else knew had been fought. I saw the ghost of Robert in his armchair, his face a mask of stern disappointment. I saw the ghosts of my children, laughing as they ran down the hall, their innocence a shroud over the house's dark secret. I went upstairs to Michael's old room. She was right. He was gone. The bed was neatly made, but on the pillow was a single folded piece of paper. Not for me. It was addressed to Dad. A letter to a dead man. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Dad, I don't know what to think. All my life I looked up to you. You were my hero. You taught me what it meant to be a man, to be honorable, to protect your family. But what did you protect? A lie? Was my entire life a lie? Mom told me everything. And Claire found that journal. I don't know what to believe, but the DNA test doesn't lie. I'm not your son. So who am I? Every memory I have is tainted now. Every time you praised me, every time you disciplined me, what were you thinking? Were you looking at me and seeing him? I have to go. I can't be in this house. I can't look at Mom. I can't look at my own face in the mirror. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, or her. I just know I'm not Michael Ashton anymore. I don't know who I am. I folded the letter and placed it back on the pillow. The scorched earth was all around me, a disgraced family friend, a daughter who saw me as a monster, a son lost in a wilderness of lies. The family, that fragile construct Robert had been so desperate to preserve, had shattered into a million pieces. I stood in the center of the wreckage, and for the first time in 60 years, I could breathe. I did not regret it. To regret it would be to wish myself back into the cage, and I had spent far too long in the dark. A week later, the for sale sign was hammered into the front lawn. The realtor, a bright young woman named Brenda, with a smile that never faltered, walked me through the house. "It has such good bones," she chirped, running a manicured hand along the mahogany banister. "A beautiful home, really. A classic. Someone is going to be very happy here." I just nodded, my eyes tracing the path of my life within those walls. Good bones. This house was a skeleton, and I had been the ghost haunting it. We stood in the living room, where Robert had held court, his voice booming, filling every corner with his certainty, his pronouncements, his rules. Brenda saw a stately fireplace and elegant crown molding. I saw the spot on the Persian rug where I had collapsed after telling him about Alistair, his words, hysterical, imagination, reputation, striking me with more force than a physical blow. We moved to the dining room. "Imagine the dinner parties," Brenda said, her arms spread wide. I imagined them all too well. Decades of them. Alistair Finch, Uncle Alistair, sitting at our table, passing the potatoes, laughing at Robert's jokes, his eyes occasionally flicking to me with a look of proprietary amusement. Me, smiling, playing the perfect hostess, my stomach churning with a sickness that had nothing to do with the food. My performance of a lifetime, night after night. In the kitchen, Brenda admired the charming, retro countertops. I saw the 1,000 meals I had prepared, the school lunches I had packed, the birthday cakes I had baked. Each act of domesticity was an act of defiance, a way to prove to myself that I was still there, a real person, a mother, not just a vessel for a secret. But it was also a chain. Each meal served, each dish washed, was another link forged in my captivity. Upstairs, she peeked into the master bedroom. So spacious, she declared. I saw the vast empty space on Robert's side of the bed after he was gone. I saw the window I had stared out of for countless nights, watching the moon and wishing for an escape that never came. This wasn't a bedroom. It was a cell, a beautifully appointed carpeted cell with an ensuite bathroom. She didn't ask why I was selling. Old woman, recently widowed, kids grown. The story wrote itself in her mind, a simple, tidy narrative. She didn't see the truth. This wasn't a downsizing. It was an escape, an exorcism. The day the sale closed, I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The furniture was gone. The paintings were off the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the faded wallpaper. The house was hollowed out, echoing with the ghosts of what it had pretended to be. Without the props, it was just a collection of boxes, stripped of its power. I ran my hand along the wall in the hallway, the cool plaster under my fingertips. Goodbye to the silence of fear. Goodbye to the woman who lived here. I didn't take much. A few clothes, some photographs of the children when they were too young to understand the complexities of their own lives, and my gardening tools. Everything else was part of the lie, and I was leaving it behind to be sold or thrown away. My new lawyer's office was in a modern glass building downtown, a world away from the dusty, wood-paneled office of the man who had first reviewed my case. This lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Ms. Davies, listened without judgment as I laid out my instructions. I didn't tell her the whole story. I didn't need to. I just told her what I wanted to do with the money. "You want to set up an anonymous trust?" she asked, peering at me over her glasses. "With the entire proceeds from the sale of the house. That's very generous, Mrs. Ashton." "It's not generosity," I said, my voice clear and firm. "It's a debt. The fund will have a specific purpose. It will provide legal aid and financial support for women, particularly those in smaller, rural communities." "A worthy cause," she nodded, making notes. "Any specific kind of legal aid?" I met her gaze. "It will be for women whose claims of misconduct or harm have been dismissed. Specifically, women who have been told their cases have no merit." I said the words slowly, deliberately. No merit. The phrase that had been a death sentence for my own hope. The neat, legalistic stamp that had invalidated my suffering and locked the door on my quest for justice. "Miss..." Davies paused, her pen hovering over the paper. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, a recognition that this was more than just philanthropy. This was personal. "I see," she said softly. "The No Merit Fund. We can certainly arrange that. Anonymously, as you wish. The trust will be managed by the firm, and you will receive no personal credit or recognition." "That's exactly what I want," I said. "It isn't about me. It's about them. It's about ensuring that when a woman speaks her truth, the first response isn't to measure its value against a man's reputation or the convenience of the system. It's about giving their truth a fighting chance." I signed the papers, my signature firm and steady. It felt like the last shackle falling away. The money, the house, the inheritance Claire was so obsessed with. It had never been mine. It was Robert's. It was built on my silence. By turning it into this fund, I wasn't giving it away. I was cleansing it. I was taking the currency of my oppression and forging it into a weapon for others. I kept very little for myself. I didn't need it. All I had ever truly wanted was my freedom, and that was something no amount of money could buy. I had to take it for myself. Now, I live here. My apartment is small, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen. But the entire western wall is a single sheet of glass overlooking the ocean. The air that comes through the open balcony door is clean and sharp with the scent of salt and distance. It doesn't hold 60 years of secrets. It doesn't stick in your throat. It just is. I wake with the sun, not with the oppressive weight of the day ahead. The silence here is different. In that house, silence was a living thing, a predator. It was the absence of truth, the sound of words being swallowed, of screams being smothered before they could form. It was the sound of Robert's disapproval, of Alistair's victory, of my own slow erasure. Here the silence is a vast, open space. It's the gentle lapping of waves against the shore below. It's the distant cry of a gull. It's the quiet hum of my own thoughts, finally free to roam without fear. I am alone, but I am not lonely. Loneliness is feeling invisible in a house full of people. This is solitude. This is peace. Some mornings, I walk down to the beach. I wear an old pair of boots and walk along the tide line where the water churns up treasures from the deep. I look for sea glass, smooth, opaque, their sharp edges worn away by the relentless tumbling of the sand and the waves. They were once something else, a bottle, a jar, a window pane, something sharp, useful, and easily broken. But the ocean took them, broke them, and then spent years, decades, smoothing them down, transforming them into something new, something beautiful, not because of what it was, but because of what it survived. I have a small collection of them on my windowsill, glowing like jewels in the afternoon light. They told me my case had no merit. A legal term, a sterile judgment passed down from a world of paper and precedent, a world that had no language for my particular kind of pain. For a long time I believed them. I internalized their verdict. I myself had no merit. I was a broken thing, a hysterical woman, a fragile creature whose story was an inconvenience. Perhaps they were right. In their world, the world of lawyers and reputations and statutes of limitation, my claim had no value. It was too old, too messy, too reliant on the memory of a woman they had already deemed unreliable. But I don't live in their world anymore. I live in mine. And in my world, there is merit in survival. There is an undeniable, unassailable merit in waking up every morning for 60 years in the prison your life has become and still choosing to breathe. There is merit in raising children with a love so fierce it exists alongside the constant, grinding pain of their very origin. There is merit in tending a garden, in coaxing life from the soil, when your own life feels like a barren wasteland. There is merit in truth, no matter how late it comes, no matter how scorched the earth is in its wake. And there is a profound and terrible merit in raising a world built on your pain to the ground, just so you can finally see the sky. I look out my window now, past the green sea glass on the sill, to the horizon. It's endless, and for the first time in my life, so am I. What walls have you built, or been trapped within, that are waiting to come down? What truth are you waiting to speak, and what kind of sky might you see on the other side?